Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire.
Welcome back, everybody, to the IDP Heat Seekers Fantasy Show. Reunited, and it feels so good. We're sorry. It is my fault that we missed a few weeks, but we are back at it with what'll be a fun topic for the evening. I am your host, Brad Menendez, as always, with my main man, Booger from the Nerds, and Craig Reith. Paul, how you doing, brother? How you feeling?
I feel like a normal functioning human, and after the last 2 weeks, we'll take it. We'll take it. I had moderate to severe symptoms, and 2 weeks off of work sounds all fun, and then you realize it's more like 2 or 3 days off of work, and the rest you just sleep, and and you mute your mic so that you can, cough. It's fun. Craig, how are you?
Doing all right. Done with work for the week. Weather's been decent. Doing what you can. Trying to stay sane till the end of the year and figure out this NFL season, which I don't know that we're going to get a handle on, or that they'll get a handle on completely either. So.
Well, and it's already going to be mid-October soon, so it's like, before we know it, we're into the holidays, and it just gets crazier and crazier. And I feel like this year, not only the holidays will get crazier, but the NFL season will get crazier. I mean, now we're playing games Thursday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, just because of COVID stuff. And, if you're Tennessee Titans players, please just stop. Whatever you're doing, don't lick door handles or whatever it is that you're getting all this from. I feel like they're the reason that things are getting worse every week. So, that being said, everybody continue to be safe and do the best you can, but stay away from Tennessee Titans players because obviously they are highly contagious. I know we've got quite a few that keep hitting the COVID list. So, but that's not what tonight's show's about. Tonight's show's kind of I call it the quarterly report. We're going to look at a lot of the guys that are atop the leaderboards for IDP. Depending on the type of league, your scoring might be slightly different, but these are pretty well set guys that are the top of all the leaderboards. And we're going to kind of talk about what we think about them, if we think they're really going to last, if this is more of a mirage and it's just the luck of the draw. But it's interesting. We're all working off the same list. Craig was nice enough to put it all together for us and make sure that we're all staring at the same individuals. And we're just going to roll with it. We're going to have fun with it. We're going to talk about guys we like, don't like, and do some of those things. But as always, if you have questions, Craig does a great job getting start-sit IDP stuff together every week. So if you have questions, post them in Discord and the Facebook community. When Craig posts about asking for start-sits, make sure you get them in there so that we can help you set the best IDP lineup each week. And do all those things, like, subscribe, hit notification icons on YouTube. If you're watching this, if you're listening to the podcast, 5-star rate and review would be wonderful. We do like and appreciate people saying that we are awesome. So with that being said, we will just roll into it. So the way that we have it broken down is we broke it down in a couple different types. So we got our DBs, our DLs, and our LBs, and some of that is, there's some edge mixed in and things like that. But Craig, I'll let you get this conversation rolling, and we'll just have fun with it.
Yeah, so I wrote about this a little bit in the Should Start article to throw something else in there because I knew we'd be talking about this, but it's clearly a wonky year, but we're also working with a small sample size. So we have an inordinate number of cornerbacks looking at the top 25 compared to other years here. And it's also thrown off by the fact that when you're looking through 4 games, you have some of these guys that have played only 3 games, with the Steelers, and due to injuries, other people in here too. So one of the trends that I don't see continuing is this many quarterbacks staying up that high. Some of them I think will, but when you look at how they're getting their stats, someone like Jair Alexander, who's a really good real life cornerback, he had 1 big game for fantasy, and the other 3 weeks are just sort of meh, which is sort of what you see out of these really good cornerbacks more so. And then you got someone like Pierre Dazir, who's got 40 points as the DB5 right now. He had 1 huge week last week, and his other 3 weeks are just meh. So I've not seen guys like that have the current one big week explosion and a couple other just weeks mixed in. They're staying up top there. I think you're going to see guys like, someone that's relatively high, but John Johnson sitting there, DB9. He's more likely to stay there or ascend when you look at the sort of weeks that he's had, and also his production is largely based on tackles, which unless you're in a league where interceptions get you 10 or something compared to 1 for a tackle, it's going to be a little bit different. But when you're using sort of a balanced scoring, he's a guy I think that you'd want to look at for potentially acquiring, or someone farther down the list. A Landon Collins is in that same sort of position.
Yeah. Well, and I want to give kudos to Paul, because the guy that he mentioned a few times in the offseason is atop the leaderboards for DBs. And it's not because he's good. It's because he gets targeted so much and he just gets the luck of the draw. But Mike Hilton from Pittsburgh, I can see him staying that way based on, not only what Paul said in the offseason, but just looking at the way the games go. They're funneling stuff his way because, well, he's not very good. So he's going to get you the tackles, and maybe every so often he'll get you some sort of, whether it's interception or, fumble recovery or something.
Yeah.
I mean, he might get lucky, but most of his is going to be that way. But Paul, what do you think when you looked over the list? Were there guys that you were thinking should go up and down?
Besides the obvious, who had the pick sixes, who probably shouldn't end up there. Even Mike Hilton's getting sacks. I like that the stat line, he has a sack in 2 of the 3 weeks. That just shouldn't happen. But as far as who do I think should be up there, Marcus May, we knew that was going to be a situation where there was going to be plenty of opportunity, and he just really reminds me of the son of Sam. He's a New Yorker who came out of nowhere and is now shining really brightly. So there's your 1 per show. I made sure and got it out of the way early. But Dazir, I can see maybe he stays up there. Yes, I know he has the pick 6 last week, but he's getting lots of targets his way. And that's lots of solos that he can get. I didn't necessarily see that one, but he's emerging as a pretty consistent option. I like the Johnson one. I did not think that Marlon Humphrey was going to be as high up as what he is. But he's showing it consistently, week in, week out. They move him all over the field. Kraig hit on a nice one with Antoine Winfield. I'm surprised he's ahead of Chin, considering he's getting like 100% of the snaps. Winfield is also, but he's getting lots of deflections, tackles, and all that stuff. Not really sure how far to keep going here, but Justin Simmons is someone who's up there who I don't know if I see him being safety 5 or 6 on the year, but he should be a back end 1, early 2, as far as safety only. Yeah, and we have the usual suspects. Landon Collins is up there. Bates is up there. And one of the ones, I don't remember who was highest on him, but Jonathan Abram. He's getting a lot of targets in his area, and he's making them count for fantasy.
As long as he doesn't get hurt. That guy's a missile. The only other name I'd bring up that I would expect to keep moving up would be Tracy Walker. Detroit was doing some really weird stuff with him early in the season where he wasn't playing every snap, but recently he's started playing every snap. He's probably their most impressive defensive player. So I would expect him to be a guy that would continue to move up. He probably should get closer to top 10 by the end of the season, I would think. Probably more like the 10 to 15 range, although 17 is not far off. But I think he's going to be up there. I'm not surprised that Jamal Adams is further down the list, just because Seattle's defense, no pun intended, has always been kind of boom or bust with IDP prospects. Back in the day, even with the Legion of Boom, they weren't like elite IDP players on a year in and year out basis. So it doesn't surprise me that Adams slid a little bit.
Yeah, well, he got hurt though.
Right.
We're talking about this being 4 games in. He's 2.5 games
Right.
in,
Yeah.
basically, and he's a back end 2.
Mhm.
Not much more you can really ask.
Yeah, very true.
And the other thing with him, when you look at the guy that came in and replaced him, Ryan Neal, I mean, a guy out of nowhere that was talking about quitting the team comes in and is just blowing up the stat line too since he's replaced Adams. Adams, there was a lot of questions about him going to Seattle, kind of like what you said, Brad, about his prospects moving forward as opposed to that kind of crappy situation where he ate up everything, sort of like Marcus May is doing now. It wouldn't be the first time some guys gotten a lot of money over in Washington and then just disappeared in the fall. So we'll have to see what happens, but in 2.5 games to be at number 19. And then other guys, like Paul said, Chin, I think he's still sort of finding himself, and he's in a hybrid role where they're playing him sort of more as a linebacker, but then also they've put him out at safety at both positions. So he'll find his way.
Yeah.
But that whole Tampa Bay defensive backfield is just nuts when you look at, they got both safeties up there, they got one cornerback up there, and then, just their whole defense has been amazingly productive, and there were a lot of questions about, is this going to go down with fewer opportunities than they had last year with Paul's favorite son not turning the ball over all the time. But the opportunities are still there, and there's plenty of Tampa Bay Buccaneers in these lists so far this year.
Yeah, it's definitely they're definitely a defense that's really producing. So along the defensive line side of things, there's some interesting names. Obviously everybody, if you think of kind of the most surprising, obviously everybody's going to point to Eldon Smith. Out of the league for a while, came back and has really been impressive. But he's kind of the one that I would expect to see the most opportunity for aggression as well. Him and Kerry Hyder are both guys that I'm like, I'm not terribly comfortable with those guys where they're at on this list, period. But Paul, what do you think about the defensive linemen that show up on this on the top end of the IDP spectrum right now?
I think it's more consistent overall with what we thought 3 months ago was going to happen. The top 5, I'll just take Myles Garrett. Yes, he should be up there. He's getting sacks weekly. Grady Jarrett, he's getting pressure up the middle. They don't have a lot outside. They do have Fowler and Tack when he decides to show up, but he's getting pressure. But yeah, he's getting pressure up the middle. I was surprised. I actually own a couple Hicks shares for the Bears. He's been getting consistent rush off the edge, and he looks healthy again. I don't know if he can hold it up through the year because he is 31, I want to say. But he's getting there. He's getting home every week. Halden Smith, we discussed. It was more of a week 1 home run versus it being consistent every week.
Right.
I don't know. I'd like to think he keeps it up. It's unusual that Lawrence is just absent on the other side. It seems like. And the last one is Donald. We knew he would be up there. He's up there. I don't know. I guess I'll let one of you guys take the next 5, and we'll keep moving on here.
What do you think, Kraig?
Yeah, I mean, the name that just came out of nowhere for me was Shelby Harris, and I think he was hurt recently too. But, being a top 10 defensive lineman, I mean, that's a name I don't think anyone would have expected to be up at that point at any point in the season. So, I mean, that's impressive. Leonard Williams, I talked about preseason a bit, liking his situation, what they were saying out of him. He's doing great. Trey Hendrickson, I don't want any part of myself. Kerry Hyder, I don't mind for a floor. If you're looking for a guy, he's averaging 5 to 9 points a week. So if you have a DE3 or D lineman 3 or whatever, or 2 that you just want a nice floor, that's fine. But so many of these guys are just hit and miss, the same sort of thing every other week. It's a really good week or a bad week. And then some of these guys just haven't gotten going this year, like Josh Allen's not on the list. He's been healthy. He's been playing. He just isn't getting anything. So I think some of that will level out. But you got to look at how these guys are getting their points and what sort of consistency you're getting when you're putting in your lineups each week.
Yeah. And
Actually, some notes. I remember scouting Shelby Harris when he was in high school at Homestead. Did not think he would make the pros. Obviously, he proved me wrong. But I covered a game of his in high school, and yeah, Homestead, Wisconsin, or Mequon, Wisconsin, Homestead High School.
Well, he definitely, at least so far through the first quarter of the season, has looked good. And we haven't seen consistency out of him in the previous year, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I was surprised about a few names that I saw on this list that I think it's more so been about the lack of production from others, but like Winovich, I like Winovich. I didn't expect him to kind of be a top 15 IDP asset through the first quarter of the season. Frank Clark I expected to be much higher. Same as Sam Hubbard. Hubbard was a guy I was really big on preseason, and he's been okay, but not really anything worth starting right now.
Yeah.
The same with Montez Sweat. I kind of thought with Rivera coming to town, Sweat would just eat, and it hasn't really been very exciting.
But he's also lost two of the other really good rushers alongside of him. So, I mean, he is getting more focus at this point with Young out for probably a couple more weeks, and Ioannidis is out for the year, I
he's
think.
done for the year.
Yeah.
So other than that, this list is, like we talked about, kind of guys we expected to be there. For the most part, I think some of these guys will fall off the list before too long. There's a few. Hendrickson, I'm not interested in. And guys that I expect to move around a little, obviously. Yannick, I'd expect him kind of regress more to around the 10 range, where you see a guy like Bosa go up further kind of thing. things like that. But, from the IDP side of things, having any of these top 15 guys outside of Hendrickson, maybe Brandon Graham, I think you're pretty well set for the rest of the season. They'll be pretty productive for you. And even a few guys will pop up in there, move up a little further. I expect Buckner, as he continues to grow in Indy, slide up some, things like that. But yeah, those are all the names that I think that bear conversation about. Carl Lawson's a pleasant surprise on there. I've always liked Carl Lawson, but he's never really shown out. So it's nice to see him producing.
He doesn't have a high fantasy floor.
Right.
He's either sack or...
Yeah, he's very dependent on doing something special for sure. I think there's a lot to talk about, though, on the linebacker side of things. There's a lot of interesting names that have popped up on there. And even, like in the top 5, Patrick Queen, I wouldn't have expected... we all talked Patrick Queen, positively, but maybe not top 5 positively. Paul, what's your take on, or Craig, what's your take on these linebackers through the first quarter?
There's a lot of names that you're not seeing that, for whatever reason aren't on there. Devin Bush isn't someone who's up there, and on the other side of it, you have Vince Williams sitting at number 10 through 3 games. And it's not like a guy's eating tackles. He's just getting big plays. And I think that's sort of what you were seeing with Hilton there, too. It's that defense as a whole is elevating a lot of these guys to fantasy relevance because of so many pieces that you have to pay attention to with Watt and Dupree. Bush gets attention on the line. Tyson Alualu is, fantasy relevant for the first time in a while. Hayward is still relevant. There's just so many pieces there to pay attention to, and they're scoring points, which is why people are having to throw, hence the Hilton points. And are we going to see it balance out? I don't think Vince Williams is going to stay a top 10 linebacker for the year, but we're partly through the season, and it's not like Watt isn't on the list. He's down at 14, so it's just you have a number of linebackers. Last year it was Watt and Dupree and Bush were up there. Now you're seeing Dupree isn't up there and Bush isn't up there. So how it's all going to balance out for these teams is going to be really interesting. And you see this a lot of time with the teams on these lists year to year, but a surprise one for me is both of those linebackers for the Vikings, Kendricks and then Wilson being up there was a big surprise. Devin White's lower than I thought he would be, but both he and Levante David, they're top 25 guys again for linebackers. So you can kind of see that there's these teams where, there's a lot of production to be had. That's one of the interesting things that I noticed just this far through.
Yeah, the vets on the list I was surprised by. I mean, like, the biggest one for me is a guy that I think could continue to produce this season, which is John Bostic. He's just kind of taking control of Washington's linebacker group, and it's not that he's a bad player. I mean, he's bounced around the league for a while now, and he's been kind of a fill-in guy, but never really been a leader. But because Washington's got such a young group, he's just kind of taking the reins. And the other conversation that we had preseason that I think we're finally starting to see some clarity on is Philadelphia's linebacking group. We were wondering who the guy's going to be, and it looks like Jerry's kind of taking control of it. Although I still think Davian Taylor throughout the year could continue to grow in that role, grow in a role with them, because I like Taylor, just like I think Paul liked him in the preseason as well. But those were kind of the two that stood out to me is the guys in the East. But most of these other names are guys we expected to see. Although Josie Jewell was kind of a guy that we all said was a bit of a throwback linebacker, so I'm surprised he's as high as he is on this list. But he seems to be eating up tackles and getting in there. So, veterans and surprise youngsters are kind of my take on looking at this linebacker group. It's like, oh, look at all these vets and these young guys that are on here. What do you think, Paul?
And the names that we haven't mentioned, can somebody find Corey Littleton? Is he MIA? I know Darius Leonard, he got hurt, but he's been kind of missing also. We expected him to be LB 1 overall. Not on the list. Not good there. But the other names that you mentioned, I thought the same thing. How is this guy in the league? Oh, he's LB 6 on the year. Huh? What? I don't expect maybe all of them to hang up there, but Bostic and Miles Jack, who's Eric Wilson, Jewel, and Gary, however you pronounce his name. Yeah, they should all be up there just because they're seeing time and they're on the field a lot, because the offenses for these guys just aren't good. Also, one of the names that we haven't mentioned, but it's been nice seeing Quan Xander up there and being consistent. It was interesting watching the first month and a half before he got hurt last year, and it was as if he wasn't on the field, and now it looks like he's all over the field. So I know he didn't quite make the sheet, but for someone that we were, I guess, interested in, I'll just leave it at that. It's been nice seeing him making plays.
And Littleton is getting over 60 snaps a game. When I look at lineups snap counts, 67, 60, 69, and 60. So he's on the field. He's just not producing at all.
Yeah, he's 56 with our scoring. There's a lot of guys that we hadn't talked about that are just sort of on that fringe. I mean, he's not one of them, but Jalen Smith is 30, Schobert's 34, and I think that's large part due to Miles Jack showing up and producing, because he was someone that's farther up on the list. Deion Jones is 39. Edmonds, he missed a game, but still, over 3 games, he's at 17 and a half. That whole linebacking core is just sort of eating itself, for lack of a better word, right now, because Milano's having a good year. They were both out for a while, so there's weird things going on there. And I think, for me, that's the takeaway, and we all sort of implied this going into the year, but it's going to be hard to have takeaways from this year that you're just completely sold on for some of these guys, just because of how weird the season is and how weird the usage is on some of these guys. Like we said with Washington, we kind of thought that Thomas Davis would be a guy there, and Cole Holcomb. Well, Holcomb was hurt, playing, but he wasn't playing on defense. And then he's out. Thomas Davis has been out. So it's been Kevin, Pierre, Louis,
Louis,
and then Bostic, which no one was talking about Bostic at all. KPL had some little bit of buzz going into the season from some people in Washington, but you just throw your hands up here in some of it. And like for this week, Darius Leonard's out. It looks like Walker might be out. Okereke, or if that's how you pronounce his name, he's coming off a thumb surgery, but he's practicing. So it's like, what happens if the three of them are out? What's that going to look like for a week there? And there's so much to that this year. It's hard to get a handle on it.
Yeah, it's one of those where I've noticed myself shuffling my roster a lot. I've been looking for kind of guys to throw in, especially when it comes to the IDP leagues where it's not as deep. I mean, our positionless league, you kind of have what you have. There's not a ton of movement that you're able to do. But some of the other leagues where I'm starting, 2-2-2 or, something like that, I feel like I'm churning my roster a lot. Like, I was one of the guys that jumped on Bostic after he had one good week, and just to see if he continued to produce. And now I'm starting him every week. Jalen Smith, I'm still kind of starting most weeks, and I expect there to be some bounce back in him. Things like that. So I feel like that's kind of the mantra for 2020 is just you have to be able to kind of pivot with whatever's going on, especially if your team is struggling to produce IDP points. You just got to cut bait, find something else, and move on. Outside of obviously the names you have to keep. Roquan Smith has been by far the most surprising to me because we all kind of were. Nobody was like super high on him. Some of us, I think maybe Paul might even been like not interested remotely in him, but he's been probably their best linebacker, and it's been surprising.
He's been missing tackles, but it also means that the defense sees that also, and they're now targeting him versus saying, "Oh, you were what 8th or 9th overall? We'll throw somewhere else."
Right.
No. They're looking at you, and that's a recipe for lots of fantasy stats on the defensive side. See Mike Hilton.
Very true.
Yeah, and I think with the way they're playing that defensive line, even, with Hicks getting attention, they're paying attention to Mack and Quinn. He's getting more TFLs than normal. I mean, he's got a lot of tackles, but he's tied for second in the league for TFLs, which I don't think is something that we expected out of him. It amounts to the same as a sack. You're just tackling someone that isn't a quarterback, basically. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So we're through the first quarter of the season. What is your guys' plan as you move forward? I mentioned already that you have to be willing to pivot and cut bait and move on to kind of churn the roster if need be, but are you guys seeing any trends in how you manage your teams from the IDP side of things? Are you looking to, like from the offensive side, I've started, I've kind of looked, I took a look at my team after week 4, all of my different teams, and said, okay, these teams aren't contenders, and I think they're playoff contenders, but that's not good enough in my mind. It's either you're a contender or you're not. So I started selling and moving, and I did some things like that. Like, what are you guys doing with your IDP rosters with the craziness of the year that's going on, with how things are producing? Kraig, what's your big takeaway from the first quarter? What are you doing moving forward to try to make heads or tails of it?
I'm trying to find guys that, I think are going to have a chance at producing down the road more than I've used to. With these leagues where you're seeing a lot of guys get hurt or seasons like we're seeing with this, when you have a league with a bench of, 30 or something because you have 50 roster spots, you can generally find a couple of guys that you don't need, or someone goes on the COVID taxi list for a few weeks. You can pick up a third-string linebacker because the second-string guy is starting and say, hey, with everything going on, this guy might come along. let's see if he hits. You're seeing a lot of younger guys get more opportunities, so I'm paying more attention to them and picking more of them up with the hopes of, all right, let's see if this sticks, to try to be ahead of it, other than just being reactionary. I mean, some of these leagues, like the positionless league, you got to be reactionary, because if a guy has a blow-up week because suddenly he's starting, you might as well try to go get him to see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, get rid of him. Somewhere where cornerbacks are more viable like that, you're going to have a lot more options. But if I'm sort of like in a rebuilding league, I'm just taking the guys that I want to see how they do long term, and I'm sticking with them. I'm not going to intentionally play Kyle Duggar over Chuck Clark or something like that. But if I have him on my league bench, I'm not throwing away Kyle Duggar to go out there and get Brian Poole or someone just for this year, because I don't see it as helping myself with my long term plan.
Absolutely. Paul?
Yeah. If I have leagues where I'm super deep at it, I'm finding as many of the third, fourth, fifth round rookies who might see the field in the future, and they might be on poor defenses where they do play. If I can roster Ashton Davis, I'm going to roster him. If I can roster Duggar, I'm going to roster him. If I'm in a shallower league, well, I take the opposite strategy. Okay, John Bostic's a free agent. I'll pick him up. Pierre Lewis is a free agent. I've been playing him in every league or weekly in a few of them. Who's the guy for the Eagles that I'm playing? I'm playing him in XFL.
Jerry?
Nathan Hewitt. Or Neville Hewitt.
For the Jets.
He was someone that basically got thrust into a starting role. I've been playing him every week just because of injuries and opt-outs, and if I'm in a shallower format, you do what you have to, but just basically, if you have the option, roster your Davion Taylors, your guys who are going to see the field in the future, but because they couldn't mentally get through it, they're not on the field yet. But yeah, if you have the option, do it. If not, you throw your John Bostics out there. It's know your league. Do you have the option?
And there you go. That's that. So, what else, Kraig?
One of the things I'd just say about that, like we mentioned how you were surprised about Josie Jewell. Most of your leagues, you're going to be able to go in there and see what a guy's doing week to week, and you can find snap counts online. And I strongly suggest you guys go online and see, all right, how much of the defensive snaps is this guy playing? Jewell got thrust in there out of necessity. He had 3 weeks of between 4 and 6.5 points, and then he had 22 points the other week. Realize what happened in that game, and is that going to be consistent going forward? Everyone loves to see that guy blow up, and the initial reaction is, oh my God, I got to go get him. Waivers, most leagues don't have first come, first serve constantly. There's some sort of waiver process. Sit back, look at it, figure out what's going on before you go throwing all your free agent bucks, your waiver priority at a guy. I wouldn't suggest it at an IDP for the most part ever, but if you are, don't be wasting it on a guy like Josie Jewell, who's probably not going to duplicate that this season.
Be careful. Be careful. Okay, so that's that. First quarter's in the books. Let's see if we can make it through the second quarter. As things keep racking up, who knows what we're going to get. But keep it here. So we're here to help, on a weekly basis. If you have questions, hit us up. You see all of our Twitter handles. Those of us that are on the Twitters. Those of us that aren't on the Twitters, you can get on Facebook and talk to Paul there. We're here to help. If you guys got IDB questions, if you're looking to pick up free agents and you're not sure about them, ask questions, hit us up. Either way, rotoheat.com, and we'll talk to you guys again next week.
See ya.
Also, right there, playlist. Hit it. Watch the videos. Do it. You want to. Do it.